This is the cover of the new Arctic Research Plan, which was released in December of 2021, so just a couple months ago now. And the new Arctic Research Plan provides a bold vision for federal agencies to nimbly and collectively help understand and support resilience in the face of the rapid changes in the Arctic. And the rate at which the new challenges are emerging in the Arctic requires quick and decisive action. So this new Arctic Research Plan, which spans the timeframe from 2022 to 2026, aims to deliver science and knowledge to decision makers in the Arctic and beyond. And the plan is designed to provide pathways to improve coordination among federal agencies working in the Arctic, and as well to strengthen relationships between federal agencies and indigenous communities, academia, and non-federal researchers, the state of Alaska, nonprofits, and private sector and international organizations. So really trying to work across all of these groups. And the graphic that appears here is on the report cover and reflects this holistic approach. And we want to thank the artist Molly Trainer from Nome, Alaska, who detailed the center illustration, and Eric Klein, who did the overall graphic. So the next slide. If you took part in the plan development process, you will be familiar with this graphic, and it has been updated to show the structure of the plan as released in the December final version. And the top section shows 4 policy drivers, that is areas where Arctic research supports US policy, and these are directly connected to other elements of the plan. And the center is in red are the 4 priority areas with icons indicating which policy drivers they support. And the priority areas represent areas for broad cross-cutting research focus, and each has a goal that drives the plan. And I'll go through those goals in a minute. The priority areas are community resilience and health, Arctic systems interaction, sustainable economies and livelihoods, and risk management and hazard mitigation. And so on the level below, the priority areas in blue are foundational activities, and these activities are essential to achieving the priority areas and will remain foundational to Arctic research beyond the 5-year duration of the plan. So they are data management, education, training, and capacity building, monitoring, observing, modeling, and prediction, participatory research and indigenous leadership in research, and technology, innovation, and application. And finally, in the center, you'll see the IARPC logo, the iceberg. This represents the IARPC collaborations platform, which is where all of the collaboration teams, what all the collaboration teams use to function, including this team, and we'll put it to use to put the plan into action. So the next slide describes how this plan will go into action. So to address the quickly changing Arctic, and with the understanding that a 5-year Arctic research plan can be quite a long cycle in relative to Arctic change, the IARPC is moving towards a biennial implementation process for the plan. So while the Arctic research plan, again, the one that was released in December, provides high-level strategy and goals, there are 2-year implementation plans that will be more granular and provide specific tangible objectives and deliverables. And this planning structure allows more opportunities for Arctic researchers and residents to drive the work of IARPC. And so the next slide just shows a schematic of how the current teams kind of fit into the structure of the Arctic research the new Arctic Research Plan. So IARPC collaboration teams, you'll see them at the bottom of this graphic here, will continue to engage and be a vital part of the Arctic research community and contribute to priority area goals. So current IARPC teams will coordinate with the priority area to define what can be accomplished and advance the priority area goals and objectives. So on the next slide, just gives you a little bit more detail about what this timeline looks like. So now we're in this third section, which is public meetings to solicit ideas for specific topics that can be pursued within each of the priority areas that I just walked through. So I'll be taking notes during today's discussion and also share with you other ways that you can contribute your ideas. And we'll add those comments that come in and share them with those who are working to develop the objectives and deliverables for the implementation of the Arctic Research Plan. The next slide gives just definitions of what we mean by objectives and deliverables, but basically we're asking the research community and the broader community to give us specific things that we can put into the under the priority areas to help achieve those priority area goals. So specific research actions that advance the goal, and then deliverable is kind of even more granular, tangible, measurable, and easily communicated research projects that demonstrate progress towards satisfying the goals and objectives. And so now I will move on to the next slide, just going through in a little bit more detail each of the priority areas. So the goal of the first priority area, community resilience and health, is to improve community resilience and well-being by strengthening research and developing tools to increase understanding of interdependent social, natural, and built systems in the Arctic. And the next slide shows some of the very preliminary draft objectives and deliverables that are being considered under this priority area. And you can also see at the top the co-leads for this priority area transition team that are David Pear with the National Park Service and Suzanne Van Drunick with the EPA. And so some of the objectives that they are considering are evaluating threats to food safety and security and developing solutions to improve availability of nutritious subsistence and market-based foods, supporting physical and mental health of Arctic residents through research on public health needs, disparities, and delivery, support integrative approaches to cultural health, wellness, and resilience, and finally, to promote research on access to safe and reliable infrastructure with relevance to human health and well-being. And the next slide, which I think will be relevant to the most relevant one to this collaboration team, is the second priority area, Arctic systems interactions, with its goal to enhance our ability to observe, understand, predict, and project the Arctic's dynamic interconnected system, and their links to the Earth system. And so the next slide has, again, some preliminary objectives here, a few areas of focus, and they are Arctic ecosystems change research, which could include the role of the Arctic in the global carbon cycle, for example, as sources and sinks of carbon dioxide and methane, also marine and terrestrial ecosystem changes, and the impact of Arctic ecosystem change and the effects on human health and food security, Arctic amplification and mid-latitude connections, both in terms of atmosphere and ocean. Oh, that was out of order. For example, the implications of Arctic change on ocean circulation, and finally, interactions among ice, atmosphere, ocean, and land. For example, the role of sea ice in the ocean ecosystem health, as well as food security. And the next slide for the third priority area on sustainable economies and livelihoods, with a goal to observe and understand the Arctic's natural, social, and built systems to promote sustainable economies and livelihoods. And the next slide shows some of their preliminary objectives: ecosystems health assessment, models and forecasts, community economic priorities, map, leverage available capacity, map and leverage available capacity, and to understand community and regional intersections and dependencies. And getting towards the end, this last priority area of risk management and hazard mitigation, which also could be very relevant to this team, with the goal to secure and improve quality of life through research that promotes understanding of disaster risk exposure, sensitivity to hazard, and adaptive capacity. And the next slide shows some of their preliminary objectives, as well as, again, those who are leading this team. And so some of the preliminary objectives are, or questions are, what data, tools, and technologies are needed to increase understanding of Arctic ecosystems to improve hazard mitigation and adaptive capacity? How can we better share this information, data? How do we increase our understanding of how environmental change will affect current and future adaptive capacity and resiliency? And finally, how can we better understand how hazards, both acute and chronic, will affect critical infrastructure and vice versa? And so the next slide here goes through the foundational activities, just another reminder of what those are. The foundational activities are also drafting some objectives and deliverables. I'm not going to go through them right now, but if there are questions that come up relevant to these foundational activities, I can point them out. Or if you have questions about what their draft objectives are, I'm happy to share those as well. And then the last slide is just some discussion questions, and I'm not sure, maybe the co-leads for the Glaciers team have other discussion questions that they would like to consider as well. And I also would invite Greg, since he happens to be here and is involved in this process, if Greg, you have anything you want to add to this, especially relevant to the Glaciers team.
Thanks, Meredith. I don't have any specific really questions to ask or anything, other than to encourage you guys to think about how you can interface with the transition teams, especially with PA2 seems the logical place, about what their objectives and priorities ought to consider as they're developing their objectives and their deliverables, what they ought to be considering as part of their suite. I know that they intend to be reaching out to the collaboration teams, but I don't know if they've reached out to you all yet. So that would be one that I would definitely encourage. And otherwise, I'm really just want to hear the conversation at this point. It's just helpful for me to kind of get a pulse of things.
I guess we'll open the floor. We can use the hands up, and I'm happy to reshare the slides, or maybe Meredith, can you also do that now too, if we need to?
I can. Mm-hmm.
Forget how to do hands up. Greg, I think one of the questions that sits in my mind often, with respect to, and others, with respect to the biennial implementation plans. I mean, I understand the longer term context of the Arctic Research Plan, and how that feeds into, say, agency calls for or requests for proposals. But the biennial implementation plan, that's got a much shorter time frame. I mean, 2 years, that's really long enough to put out an RFP and then get a proposal in and have that funded, and but not enough time to actually complete the work. So the biennial implementation plans, are those, how are they, are they more or less going to be gathering results from projects that have already started, or are they still intended to seed future work? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I know what you're getting at. So the overall Arctic Research Plan is a 5-year plan, and the biennial implementation plans are what they sound like, for a couple of years of duration. Necessarily, that means that the deliverables that come out of that kind of a plan are going to be more tightly focused than they would be if you were thinking about a deliverable that has a 5-year timeline, a time horizon for it. But the objectives themselves under the biennial implementation plan, they certainly might, I don't know, because it's up to the drafting teams and the review process to take us through, so it's still early days, but it certainly might be the case that some of those objectives are sort of aspirational in the sense that they will probably take longer than a couple of years. And there might be deliverables that you can do in the first couple of years that then you need to do some more work in the next couple of years. And so I think it may be that in some cases, if an objective comes up that looks like it needs a few years of work rather than it can be done in those 2 years, it might be that there's a program that needs to be created to help foster some of that objective to get to where it wants to go. But other things may well be stuff that can be done more quickly, either with existing programs that people need to, take advantage of those in different ways. The other thing to keep in mind is that a deliverable doesn't have to be like a research paper. It doesn't have to be a specific, a white paper or a report or something like that. A deliverable could be a data set. It could be a workshop. It could be a series of workshops, right? It could be a variety of things. And so there's a lot of creativity space available to people in how they want to go at it. The main thing is being able to come up with a relatively small number of objectives and a relatively small number of deliverables for each objective so that the work can go forward tractably. But yeah, we're trying not to put too much of a deliverable has to fit inside a fairly tightly defined box. We're trying not to do that. So.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that helps, and that is an important point to remember too. That a product need not be a paper in the 21st century, and that there are a lot of other very valuable things that people can do and have done that a lot of people can use to move forward with understanding the Arctic, and that's good. Yeah, any other questions? I guess I focused initially on the first part of the discussion, that what questions you have about the biennial implementation. Let's see, Mike.
Okay, actually, I have a couple of questions. One's pretty general. So at the start of the presentation, Meredith, you showed something that said something about policy. I guess I'm wondering, in the context of the research plan, what the word policy means, or what's meant by aiming at policy.
Yep, that's a great question, and one that we do get from time to time, because policy is also in the name IARPC, the Interagency Arctic Research Policy Committee, and IARPC is policy in the way that the Arctic Research Plan helps to gather agencies around shared goals, but is not policy in the sense that a lot of people think about. I struggle with answering that question. You're not alone, and I will point you to a page on the IARPC website that might be able to answer it a little bit more specifically. And also there are others on this call who are very familiar with IARPC, and if you want to take a crack at that one, that would be welcome too.
Hello, this is Sun from the Czech Propulsion Laboratory. I don't have a full versions of the Zoom because it's a limitation at JPL, so I don't have a button to put up the raise hand thing. But anyway, let me ask the question. I have a concern, and I wonder how IARPC may help to resolve this. And my concern is this: the glacier and sea level rise is a continuum in terms of the science, because it's interdisciplinary. The water may come from the glacier meltwater. It may come from the river over the continental scale. You know, in the Arctic River, they are gigantic. You're looking at the Leonard, the Mackenzie, the Ops, the Yenisei, etc. And then once it's go out the ocean, is also part of the contribution of this of the water balance, so that it need to be accounted in the water budget. And given that this effort seems to be a really interdisciplinary approach, given that, my concern is this: in a number of agencies, there are a programmatic boundary. There are program manager for hydrology. There's another program manager for glacier ice sheet. There's another program manager for ocean. There's another program manager for atmosphere, where the evaporation may take out some of the water balance, etc. So given this, and given the short term of this biennial time frame, I wonder how far the IARPC has addressed this issue, so that it can break through all of these programmatic boundary, not within one agency, but also across agency. That's my question.
Well, that's a, I mean, that's a great question, Sun. I would say that's a sort of perennial question for avoiding the balkanization of disciplines within agencies and across them. I'm actually wondering if I guess, speaking to NASA, from what I've seen of HQ, and maybe Caitlin can speak to more detail about this, the program scientists do actually spend a good amount of time speaking to each other, and some of it is associated with IARPC, and Christine helps organize some of those meetings. So I don't think it's not quite as, the boundaries aren't quite as strong as they might initially seem. I don't know what it's like at other agencies, though, in terms of addressing what is a pretty interdisciplinary question. Caitlin or Christine, do you want to add anything to that?
I'll do a little bit. I know Christine works a lot more on working on IARPC with multiple different program managers than I do. But yeah, there is a lot of synergy in terms of interagency collaboration and communication at headquarters. Even within the Earth Sciences at headquarters, we've got different kind of thematic groups that bring together program managers of different disciplines. For instance, so the cryospheric sciences, modeling, analysis and prediction, and physical oceanography all make up the climate variability and change focus area at headquarters. So Torsten, Nadia, who's the program manager for physical oceanography, and David, who's the program manager for MAP, they're constantly talking to each other and working to fund different projects together. So there's definitely that sort of interaction going on all the time. And even with IARPC, there's even more of that as we get in. We are involved more with the terrestrial ecology folks and the oceanography folks as well. Christine, I don't know if you want to add anything else.
Nothing from Christine. Mike still had a second question we want to answer or let him pose. Sun, does that, or actually, does anyone from who, Zoe, you're associated with a different agency. Do you want to speak about your experience with CREL and the forces that fund it, and how how discretized they are or not?
Yeah, and I think it's a really good question, and one that I don't know if there's a one-size-fit-all answer quite yet, but I feel like it's trying to improve the collaboration is something that we're all striving for. So I know, at least in our organization, and I neglected to point out that I'm part of the DoD and actually the US Army Corps of Engineers. So my research is focused a lot on glaciers and polar areas, for instance. But obviously our organization is focused on infrastructure, hazard mitigation, for instance, especially up in Alaska. And so from that perspective, within our organization, we have a lot of transdisciplinary work that goes on just within our own organization. So I do know that we work, especially in Alaska, we try to work a lot with the communities and try to come up with solutions, especially for hazards that are caused by sea level rise, for instance. And I think that's improving. Obviously, historically, it may not have always been the best. And then we also approach it from sort of a grassroots effort. So I know on an individual level, a lot of us are striving to include more Indigenous voices within our own work. And that's really important to us on that level. And then I see it coming more from our headquarters on down as well. And that's especially with the change in administration, there's been a lot more support for that type of work. And then I also know, I think even on larger scales, so for instance, the Navigating the New Arctic program through the National Science Foundation is supporting more of that type of work directly. So I feel like it's a really great question and one that we're all trying to work towards across multiple agencies. But I think there's more work that we can do.
Thank you, Zoe. Yeah, I agree. NSF seems the most agile in this regard in terms of adjusting to interdisciplinary needs. Greg and Mike or Sun, do you want?
Thank you very much for your answer, and I'm really glad that there has been dialogue toward that direction, and I totally agree with Joe that this is really a perennial issue, not just for this, but for many other areas also. But my concern is that whether these effort would occur in time to address the short term of the biennial time frame, and that's where my concern coming from.
So if I may, I want to actually come in on this question before I ask the other question. So I was the first executive director of the Office of the USGCRP from 93 to 97, which is a time that people say things actually worked. So I came in, I was not a government employee. I was not in one of the agencies. I came in from Livermore Lab as a University of California employee. And the challenge was to get all the agencies to work together. My experience had been, I had some efforts trying to get the DOE labs to work together and then to get campuses of the University of California to work together, both of which were quite interesting challenges. And what has changed since back then? And I, in reviewing various of the versions of the USGCRP strategic plan, keep commenting on this, is that back then there was a focus, and the main focus was around key scientific questions. So it was about what is happening to ozone depletion, or what is happening to about ENSO or something like that. And the there was one person designated who was on the subcommittee on global change research, so a high-level person who had authority, who was made responsible for that issue and was to know what every project was in every agency on that issue. So for example, Bob Watson knew about every single issue on ozone depletion across everything. Mike Hall knew about every single issue on ENSO and that kind of issue. And Bob Carell was doing a lot on the climate change or something like that. But there was a high-level person who was focused around doing something on a particular issue. And it was a science issue that drove it and stuff. And what's happened since then is that the program has gotten broken down into, well, we do research, we do assessment, we do education, we do these other things. And while we had those back then, and we had people in charge of some of those things at the SGCR level on education and things, I think it sort of loses the push that was being talked about an issue unless you have a high-level person who can really speak to it. And that seems to have dropped off. There was, what was his name from NASA who was speaking on the glaciers and ice and stuff we've had. There have been people over the years. I think I'm pretty far from what's going on in the research, but I get a sense that's dropped off. And I sort of wish that the program were being driven on what are the key issues affecting the Arctic. I mean, sea level rise and the glaciers and everything. And so what we've got to get is a much better estimate of how rapidly and what's going to happen with respect to sea level rise. And that involves knowing glaciers, and then it involves all the way going to impacts on coasts and stuff. And that the focus, if all the research is focused, I've got to get better estimates on these things. And there's somebody who's pulling it together and trying to do that. I guess I think that might be a better way of how you get the agencies to work. Right now, a number of us, including Bob Carell, who I still talk with on various things, sort of look and each agency can go off on its own and say it's doing research, and that's great. And it's fulfilling the plan by doing research, but working together. Now, I know there's some of these groups that got mentioned, who mentioned Christina, about carbon cycle and about these other things, and they're great. The problem, in my view, is they're too low in the system, in the organizational system. That's not something you all can really correct at your level, perhaps. But as the strategic plan is put together, it seems to be that there are a number of these key science issues that the public really wants to know that you can go out and sell. NOAA just came out with that fascinating report of saying sea level is going to rise by a foot by 2050, or something like that. If I were a policymaker in Congress and wanted to do something, I'd want to know about that. I'd want to know all about what's happening at sea level. NASA's doing some great work on sea level. NOAA's doing it. Other agencies are doing that. Who's the spokesperson for sea level rise in the government? Who's really out there? Who's at the top level speaking across the agencies, focusing it at the SGCR level? And I think that's what has to come back on how it's achieved. OMB used to force us to do that. It used to force that process. It would say, I will not approve any increase in any agency unless all the agencies agree. Yeah. Let me tell you, that got agencies working together.
Great points, Mike. Yeah, thanks. So much appreciated. Yeah, I agree. Well, climate change has become such a multifaceted issue now that you need 24 people at that very high level, advocating for each individual major issue we're facing.
That's why Carell assigned, each person had one. There was a person on the SGCR who was responsible for modeling or for satellites or for sea level.
Well, so let's get some more voices in there. Greg, you had your hand up earlier, it's down. And now Catherine's got her hand up. Greg, do you want to say anything really quickly, or should I move on to Catherine?
All I was going to say is, how NSF tries to do interdisciplinary and that sort of thing. And Sung's worry, I guess, I will say we spend a lot of time as program managers talking to each other and are trying actively to actually get rid of any barriers that may still be perceived to exist between programs. We'd rather have things overlap than have there be gaps between them. And so we're encouraging people to get in touch with us with their ideas. Just send us an email with your idea and we'll figure out who should talk to you to give you the best advice. Don't worry about which program it ought to go in. Let us take care of that. So
Yeah, great point. Thank you. And great philosophy too, overlap rather than gaps. I like that. Catherine.
I have been thinking along the same lines as Mike. And my thought is, if we have 6 different agencies doing various research on sea level rise, how do we, and I think this is, seems like this is the goal of the research plan. How do we bring those 6, research, products together and synthesize them into something that, as Mike said, the spokesperson for sea level rise can present. So it's not, here's a list of 6 things about sea level rise. It's from all this, here's how we distill it out. Here's how we synthesize it, and to come up with, one message, or at least not 6 quite different messages. Thanks.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, a single coherent message is key in that regard. Anyone else?
Well, I do have my second question still, if I can.
Go ahead, Mike.
And this is more specific instead of general. I'm sorry about that. But so I didn't see anything in there about trying to preserve the Arctic and climate intervention efforts to do that. And I guess I hope something's going on. I would note to you that I was on the phone in a call the other day with Sir David King, who's at the Cambridge University Climate Repair Center, among other things, former UK advisor. And there's a lot of, he's pushing hard on ideas for trying to, moderate climate change through intervention. And one of the key steps would be to try and push back all this melting of Arctic sea ice, because that's sort of a critical thing on how much heat's getting absorbed in the high region. And they're, I guess, looking at ways about whether marine cloud brightening, for example, might do it, or something like that. And I don't know if there's any of those efforts going on. One of the interesting things I think would be fascinating to understand, and there was one paper once about it, was did cleaning up the sulfate aerosols that occurred because of acid rain, reduce acid rain, reduce the amount of sulfate particles essentially going into the Arctic, and might those sulfate particles have been contributing to cloud brightening in the Arctic? And so one of the reasons for the relatively rapid reduction in sea ice is that was removed. I guess I'm just wondering if there's any of that kind of research that's going on in any of the agencies. I didn't sort of see that as one of the themes in the plan.
Staying specific to glaciers and sea level, there are people who have considered some of the opportunities in that space, preventing warm ocean water from reaching glaciers, and usually the sort of levels of effort that they come up with to effect a meaningful change is expressed in hundreds of Panama canals. And in very remote places. So I think the current consensus for how to address that from a glaciers and sea level focus it's probably outside the realm of possibility. I know there are some Swiss glaciers, for example, that get covered by white tarps, and that'll keep around for a little longer, but I don't know that effort can be scaled up.
Yeah, well, the one I think he's pursuing is sort of marine cloud brightening. So it's trying to put small aerosol particles in there and see if you can brighten the clouds in some way. There are people who are trying to, pump water out and create ice in certain places and see if you can block water flows in the Canadian archipelago, or there are other things going on. I don't know if there's any government looking at it, but there's a lot of people out there who are talking about such things.
Yeah.
So.
Anyone else want to chime in or?
Yeah, this is Sun. Let me chime in here a little. The ice sheet and glacier melt, one of the contributing factor on that is the black carbon. And black carbon may come from like wildfire, you know, that even in the Siberia, there's gigantic wildfire. And those black carbon is distributed over the long range by the atmospheric transport. So any effort to reduce the black carbon would help to mitigate the melt rates and the water that contributing to the sea level rise. So speaking about that, since we are talking about the long range transport, etc. So what happened in the Arctic is not just in the Arctic itself. It may come from the other regions of the Earth. So since this is you're talking about the Earth's system science, then I wonder how this effort is connected to the other regions of the world, not only as a driver, but also as the impact, because sea level rise, right? It may occur from a lot of contribution from meltwater from glacier ice sheet, etc. But when the sea level is rising, the impact may be all the way in the tropic. If you look at the mega delta, like the Mekong River, it's a very low land, just a little bit higher sea level. It can cause a extensive flooding in those areas. So I wonder, under this effort, in terms of the Earth science, how is the connectivity, not just only the Arctic, but the Arctic may thrive and may be impacted by the other regions as part of the Earth system?
Right. Yeah. No. Great questions. Yeah, we've started to address those in the Glaciers and Sea Level team. We've had Eric Leroy from JPL come and speak about sea level impacts from glaciers far away. And yeah, no, and we've also had some presentations on folks working in the Himalaya and other places, not just the Arctic, because they're sort of transferable challenges. But yeah, it's a system level problem, and obviously sea level rise is more than just the Arctic contribution. Agreed. I had a sort of thinking about the important research questions element. I was had an idea. There was a paper last week that came out, or 2 weeks ago, by a French group on ice flow and thickness of all of the glaciers in the world. And one of the results that they had associated with this paper was they were identifying areas where there was less volume of ice than previously noted, and what the population impacts of that change in volume are going to be. They specifically highlighted, I think, the northern Patagonian ice fields and the Himalaya as well. And so the Himalaya had more ice, and the northern Patagonia ice fields had less ice, and that has direct consequences for water resources downstream for the population centers there. Now, in the Arctic, or our area of focus, we've got glaciers in Alaska and the Canadian Arctic Archipelago, and the Greenland ice sheet. These melting glaciers aren't so often used for drinking water, but they are affecting other ecosystems downstream and other sort of resource utilizations. So I'm wondering if there's an opportunity there in the sort of near term for us to look at this new data set and figure out how does this reassessment of glacier volume on a glacier by glacier basis affect what we're going to see happen downstream, whether it's how much fresh water is entering the Gulf of Alaska and affecting populations, fish populations, that sort of thing. Anyway, just as a sort of thinking about research questions, any thoughts or comments on that? No? All right. I'll leave that one be then.
Actually,
yeah.
I just, when you talked about the effects on the local population, that sounds like absolutely something that policymakers, government officials are going to care about. That's
Yeah.
something that makes sense to them, rather than just, the glaciers are only 82% of their previous volume. But I think that's a great advantage of that question.
Yeah, yeah, and we're now getting to the point where, for not every glacier is or glacier system is this. It has the same level of impact to a human population downstream or making use of resources. And some glaciers have very specific impacts. For example, Eklutna Glacier and the water supply for Anchorage. And I'm assuming, I don't know this for certain, that there are certain glacier systems in the Gulf of Alaska that are particularly important to how circulation occurs, how that freshwater output affects near shore ocean circulation.
Yeah, I think probably, and I agree with Catherine totally, and Joe, that for this to have a really strong support from different part of the government, it need to show the number one, the impact at the local level or regional level, so that whoever the representative of this place would say, aha, I am impacted by this, so I need to support this. That's very important. So my thought is that given all of this, there are always limitation. There are things that may have some connectivity or disconnectivity. However, I think that the key question is what can be done rather than what cannot be done. So with that, I would like to say that I'm here to help. And if anything I can help, I would do that. One of my experience was with I was the lead reviewer for the US government for the IPCC AR5, and I have been working with 6 agencies on that. That is not easy, but what I'm saying here, that those things are doable. So I think that's the message I would like to convey here, and I'm here to help. Let me know how I can help.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you so much, Son. We're approaching the top of the hour. Any closing questions? I particularly want to highlight that last discussion item that Meredith had. What are the most important research questions to be considered in the next 2 years? Because this is the kind of information we're going to be putting in the Biennial Implementation Plan. The ARP is set now, but the Biennial Implementation problem is still a work in progress. So we just thinking from the glaciers side, how we connect to the different priority areas, the broader the perspective, the better. Anyone else?
Just putting in the chat a link where I captured notes from today's discussion, but if you have something specific that you would like to be considered in the Biennial Implementation Plan, filling out that form is a good way to formalize it and get it in the discussion of the drafting teams. That's
great. Can we share that with the whole team?
Yeah.
Meredith, is that appropriate?
Yes, I think you should. And we can talk a little bit offline. Some of the other teams are developing forms specific for their team, that the team leaders have access to the information that comes in, so we can talk about that.
That's a good idea too. We should we should talk offline about that. Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I think we'll close it out here. Any other final thoughts, questions?
Yeah, just a quick question. This is Suzanne again. Meredith, can you email that PowerPoint slide that you showed today?
Yes, I can.
That'll be great.
yeah, we can include that when we send around a form as well.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Appreciate your time and input. And yeah, you'll be hearing some more from us soon. And yeah, we've got a good slate of presentations planned for at least the first half of the year. And yeah, come back. Thank you. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.